The following program is sponsored in part by To a Woman's Heart. The thoughts and views expressed by the following production don't necessarily reflect those of the network or any sponsors. Rainbow Room Publishing Live starting in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to Collections by Michelle Brown Blog Radio. I'm your host, Michelle Brown. This is a podcast connecting people living between the lines, standing boldly in the crosshairs of their intersectionality and creating change. Since 2017, we've shared the stories of over 100 individuals from every walk of life, from across the country and beyond. Collections by Michelle Brown Blog Radio partners with nonprofits, creatives, and other organizations to spread the good news that we're all stronger together. Our current partners include Lupus Detroit and the Esteem Awards Pride Index. Senyah Haynes is no stranger to Collections by Michelle Brown Blog Radio. She introduced us to her children's book series, Jayla Jaunts, an adventure series about a fun-loving little girl's travels with her whimsical Aunt YaYa. Senyah also co-founded Diasporal Discoveries, whose mission is to expose youth to the diversity of the African American diaspora with the goal of connecting them to different cultures, both domestically and abroad. A lot has happened since those early adventures with Jayla and YaYa, and she's back to share her new adventures about more books, travels, and other creative adventures. Senyah is also one of the featured artists in the anthology trilogy published by Rainbow Room Publishing, From a Black Perspective. Senyah, welcome back to Collections by Michelle Brown Blog Radio. How are you?
Thank you so much. So honored to be here. I am doing well. I cannot complain at all. Life is good. How are you doing, Michelle?
Well, I'm telling you, I'm doing good, and I'm thinking about it when we talked. My granddaughter had just been born. She was born in 2019.
Yes.
She's 5.
Mm.
She's a reader. I mean, they say that she's almost at a second grade level reading already.
Good for her.
I know, and we have read Jayla Jaunts,
Love
and
it.
inspired by you earlier on. One Christmas, I got her a globe, and sometimes we'll sit there, and I'll spin the globe, and it's one of these, really a smart globe where you you touch the stylus on a country, and it will tell you something about it. And every time I do that with her, I think about you and your books.
Zillador, I love it. That is wonderful. You just put me on game Smart Globe. I'm going to have to look that up.
Yeah, I'm telling you, it's really cool, It's really cool. So, wow. Long time, friend. So you've been busy. You've been busy.
Yeah, just, moving through time, living this life like us all. I listened to our old conversation the other day just to remember where I was. And my God, that was like January of 21. So it was a completely different world. We're sitting here talking about will we be able to travel and COVID this, and oh my goodness, I'm so glad that we have progressed beyond that time in our lives. My goodness.
Wow. So I think at that time you had I think I've got 2 books. I forget which 2 states, the first one and the second one. How many more have you done?
So if you have 2, you have Alabama and Alaska, because remember they're going in alphabetical order. So you have missed Arizona and Arkansas and California. So we're in the C's now. And wow. I'm working on the drawing board right now is Colorado. So yeah, you got a few to catch up on, Michelle, or your grandbaby.
Well, you know what? Christmas is around the corner. I know what we're going to be doing. I always include books in there. You've been so busy, but I know that, this is your one of your passions. Do you find, you'll be busy doing other things and it's like, wait a minute, what would Jayla do here? Or, making notes for the books about Jayla to get back to them?
Yeah, so with Jayla, since it's very geographically based, anytime I'm traveling, and that's domestically or abroad, I'm thinking of, as you know, I'm looking for the African footprint there, what Black folks have done, and I'm thinking of it in a few ways, and one of them is definitely like, how would Auntie YaYa explain or expose this aspect to Jayla about what I'm seeing? So definitely, all the time, she's always in my mind. I do take her with me.
It's interesting because I was talking with Eddie Pearson. We were talking about from a Black perspective, and I know you've been involved in that. And we were talking, and he was saying like how he talked about, the blood, the homeland, the people. And I said, in some ways, that's us. Do you know what I mean? It's like when we first came over here, part of storytelling, it was in our blood, and that's how we kept our blood strong. Even though they might have tried to dilute it and break up our families, our stories were in our blood, and they did that. Has being involved in that project changed how you think how Auntie YaYa would talk to Jayla?
I think that it has reinforced it. So I don't know if I'd say changed, except to say deepened it. So from a Black perspective, that anthology trilogy is really a collection of Black voices, each one, a collection of Black voices to show that we have diverse experiences, we have myriad stories to tell, and they're whatever the genre, they're equally important to be heard, right? We don't, in the mainstream get platforms like that. So he's like, I'm going to bring them all here. And with Auntie YaYa, if nothing else, she's trying to show Jayla state by state that wherever you are, we have stories to tell, and they're different stories. They're important stories. If we're on the East Coast, this is going to be a different kind of freedom struggle or experience than maybe down south or out west. So I don't know. I love so many things about the process with working with Eddie and Rainbow Room Publishing that I'd be hard pressed to speak about all the ways that it impacts me personally and in the art that I create that's separate. One thing I will say is that being part of the Rainbow Room family is it's relational. It's not just transactional. And that's one of the things that I love about it most. It's like home, it's family. And of course, obviously, Jayla Jaunts, that's family. That's her aunt and her niece. And I don't know, I think it's with both series, it's storytelling with love, truly. Yeah.
And it's sort of like hitting people where they're at. You start with the children because I'll say it's never too early to start telling your stories. I know stories that I can remember from my grandparents and their friends, and it sort of puts that bug in you. And the fact that what I love about and like Jayla Jaunts and how not only that, but the other work that you do and what Eddie and I were talking about is that part. Too many in our community don't know our rich history, that our history is more than just slavery. And even as you look at slavery, there are stories of resilience, resistance, strength, deep love, which is why we're here now. And sometimes I think they get lost. And without being, there's different forms of education, but without saying, you need to know that there's a way that it's like from Jayla Jaunts on through what Eddie is doing in all of his works. It's like watering those seeds. So I might hear something as a child or in one of the stories in the anthologies that's going to water that seed in me, and maybe I'll tell my story, or maybe I'll listen to someone's story or encourage someone to tell their story, which, and from a community place, makes us stronger.
Absolutely. I completely agree. I mean, I think that when we think about, obviously, youth and literacy, and then we think about just media and how our stories are transferred from one generation to another, it's important that we tackle it on all or as many fronts as possible, right? So get them when they're young with children's books that are for pleasure and fun. The textbooks in the schools, the curricula are very important. What is on mama's shelf at home that the child will grow up and grow into and pull down, right? The picture books, our art, our photography. I literally just did some of the work that I do is running a BSU, a Black Student Union at a high school. And it was yesterday, actually, we were talking about Black art. And I went in my personal library and just pulled out every art book I had, and it was photography, it was quilting, it was painting, and, the lesson was based on that. But, that the images translate through all ages, right? You don't have to read at a certain level to see our cultural expression, right? So I'm really a fan, a proponent, an advocate of transferring our story through as many ways as possible at all ages. It's really, really important. Yeah.
And, and I love that you are, you write, you're an artist. I remember us talking about how you said you were, some of your art was going to be the cover on one of the books. And the fact that then you took all of that into the classroom. And I bet you they look at it like, wow, Miss Haynes is more than, she's doing all of this, that is great too, because often I'll meet, I've gone into schools and they're like, well, I don't know if I could do this. And I'll tell the kids, I say, you do have a story, or maybe you can draw. Which is one of the other things I am loving being Sophia's Nana Shell, because we do all kind of, and the last time that I was there, she, got out her paints and she said, I'm going to do a masterpiece. And I said, well, okay. But she told me she didn't do faces good, so I did the face. And then she told me how to pose. And she did the most beautiful, she mixes her colors up and that creative expression. And I love seeing kids do that, and places where you can go into a classroom, and it might not have to be in a particular class. Maybe it's an after-school activity where you can not only expose them to people, but let them, let their imaginations run wild.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's all. If I had to sum up my passion when it comes to youth in one word, it would be exposure. Hands down, exposure. That is my goal. Like, I'm not, with any endeavor that I've entered into, with the children's books, with out of school programs, like, this isn't like a doctoral kind of situation. We're not going deep. I want to expose you and ignite that interest and spark something in you so that you will go be a seeker for yourself, right? So Jayla Jaunts, we got like 30 pages. Half of them are pictures, not too many words, but I tell you a story and I show you a place, and now somewhere in the back of your mind, that's an option, that's a possibility. And wherever you go in life, you might be like, I know a place to go where I can see that, or I've heard of that before. Let me look into that more. And especially with this age, my God, with Google, I mean, the access to information that these young people have at their fingertips, it's outrageous. They are just leaps and bounds beyond where we were or could have been with their sophistication, because it's all here. I mean, what did we hear growing up? You ask a question, go look it up. Now we know that was parents speak for I don't know. and what was the percentage that we actually, went and found an encyclopedia or whatever and actually looked that up? Nah, it wasn't high, right? Most of the time it's like, okay, if we stayed curious, we'd ask someone else till we got the answer. Maybe we'd look it up, or we just kind of keep going through life and figure it out. But like now, anything they hear, anything they think they want to learn about, they have instant access to like a depth of information, and that's amazing. So like I feel like my job is complete if I just say a thing and say, hey, if this looks good, go seek it out. Here's the start. So yeah.
I know you have a passion for youth, and you co-founded Diaspora Discoveries. Are you still able to do that, and how does that tie in with the schools?
So with Diaspora Discoveries, or DD for short, I'm doing the work, just not through that platform right now. So where we are with that is just an admin kind of situation, like grants and filings and things like that. But in the other programs that I have through other organizations that I work with, I'm absolutely doing the work of exposing young people to the diversity of the African diaspora. I did it just yesterday with Black Arts. That's what the 2 weeks before that, I went to a Black farm and I took a group of youth there, and we learned about heritage farming and food deserts and heirloom plants and all sorts of things, and techniques that were passed down generation to generation and all sorts of stuff. So yeah, still doing the work, always doing the work, no matter what banner it's under.
So I mean, the fact that you did that, but then you also, I mean, and you're traveling, you're going seeing it, and I think that no matter where I go, I look for my people. I look for my look for the stories about my people, look to see what their struggles and things have been. Now, then I noticed, because you sent me a little thing, an update, you got into film work. How did that happen?
Well, it's not new for me, but I there's been a resurgence. So if you recall, I've been an actress my entire adult life. I'm a theater girl, hands down. I'm a theater girl, but I've been doing film for quite a few years. I went to school for film, and then got out and promptly did something else because I don't know, maybe I'm antsy. I just do a lot of things. But when in 2020, after 2020, I co-wrote a piece called White Female, and it was tackling the issue of white fragility. And then I partnered with a wonderful producer, Sarah Faulkner, and we made the film. And we've done a lot of events surrounding it, a lot of I guess someone call it under the DEI banner, like diversity, equity, inclusion, but really just like having difficult conversations across race. That's what we've been doing with it. It's been in a few film festivals, and we've had some events here in Chicago, and it's pretty cool. And then my next project that I co-wrote was Crimson, and that was tackling the issue of Black women's reproductive health issues, specifically uterine fibroids. And so we made that, and that's been on the circuit as well, the festival circuit. So been traveling with those two films, and with those I have not just actress credit, but co-writer and co-producer credit. And so that was really just kind of I don't know, going back to some part of my roots, I guess. And yeah, so it's one of my loves.
Question. Because of you did this because of the pandemic. Did that and it made, in some ways it sort of like shut us in, but at some point it made it where there were things that needed to be said. Did you find that the part of where you were in also made you think about these things like Crimson? I mean, I know so many Black women who don't understand, about their health and are still suffering and dying for that. Did that sort of like make you really want to say, how do I amplify my voice so that I can get back out there, even though there was a period of time when we couldn't be out there doing it? But did that sort of like, light a fire under you to, I'm going to tell this, I'm going to make this voice heard. These are stories that need to be, and these are things that need to be addressed and have those conversations.
Well, I think what the pandemic did, and especially regarding the first film I was talking about, White Female, is it made racial conversations, it brought them to the foreground in ways that they kind of hadn't been in quite some time. And so the access was there to be able to say things and not, I don't know, have the same penalties or be concerned with the same backlash. And folks were willing to, and white folks in particular, many were willing to examine themselves in deeper ways, or at least listen or feign listening in ways that they weren't earlier. And so a lot of people were taking advantage of that. And it's like, well, here's what I've been saying, but since you're listening now, let me say this again and let me get this message out. So in that way, it was timely for White Female to come out. Crimson came out in 23, so we were a bit beyond the pandemic. I wouldn't say that that particularly had anything to do with that, but one thing that came to the foreground, became more prevalent when we were talking openly about racism, which frankly is not something that we had been doing so much before, is the disparity in Black women's health. That's part of that conversation. And so, Black women's reproductive health is an offshoot of that. So I guess, everything does link in a way. There was a lot more, there were a lot more stories being shared about Black women who have, suffered from the maternal mortality rate being so high, as opposed to their white and other counterparts. People talking about how they'd been treated during their birthing experiences. And, these conversations were happening that weren't really happening out loud before. And so, it was time to get into that as well, I think. Yeah.
Well, I know what you've done, like, film fairs and things like that, and presentations and art house. What has the audience been participation or audience? Have you gotten questions afterwards, or has, like, when you showed the film, has it led to invitations to come back and lead a discussion or to participate in discussions on both issues?
Absolutely. So for White Female, I would say that's the one that gets the most robust conversation going. Sarah and I, we went to Buffalo, New York earlier this year, and we were in a festival there. We had a discussion or talk back afterwards. And this is an audience, like, I'm one of like maybe 2-3 Black people in this audience. And it was folks really wanting to have a conversation about white fragility and tell their stories or ask questions because they don't quite understand it. And, I open myself to that work when I'm in the position of I'm a filmmaker, I'm a writer who created this piece, and I'm here to discuss this. And I feel like when, there are people who appreciate that because they recognize that you don't just go ask a Black person on the street just randomly to do the emotional labor of explaining to them how they're foul.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? But I'm here for that when I'm wearing that hat. And so folks typically kind of jump at the chance to like, oh, well, let me ask this, or what do you think about this? So, and as a result of actually the film festival in Buffalo, we got invited by another group to come out to Boston. So that'll be happening next year.
Wow.
So to answer your question, yes, conversations do happen, invitations to speak further on the topic and expand do happen, and I have experienced that people really appreciate it. Now, don't get me wrong. There are folks who think we are crazy, we are extremists, we have been brainwashed by media and what have you, and they disagree wholeheartedly. White fragility is not a thing. White privilege is not a thing. Folks need to quit whining, and that's fine too. I'm here for it all. I will discuss it all. So, yeah, and the same with Crimson. We've had discussions, talkbacks, and people have invited us to come out for further investigation of those issues.
You know, one of the things, like when you're talking about privilege and fragility amongst our, often it's in the groups where it's like what you would consider your liberal sisters, and you know, oh no, you know, I you know, they're railing against the system, but then when sometimes you're able to, like you said, sometimes you're able to show that level of fragility, you're able to sort of show how a benefit of that their privilege and how it affects things, and to I think it's important to have those conversations, especially, I mean, in these political times when people go, I don't see why, you know, women, white women, why would they do that? And, you know, and I've had people who consider themselves very progressive and everything. And when you start to talk in those things, you can sort of see, like, particularly when you talk about fragility and something, you know, it's like they're down with you until you kind of hit a nerve. You kind of hit a nerve, and it can go one or two ways. Either like they acknowledge that and sort of dig deeper and think about it and expand upon it and see what they've been doing or how they have been, or suddenly, like you said, it's like, you know, you're the angry black woman, or, you know, you're trying to blame it on me. It ain't my fault, you know. And have you experienced that?
Have I experienced people in the throes of a white fragility eruption? Is that what you're asking?
They're like, not me.
Absolutely, Michelle. Hence the birthing of the film. So, you know, girl, 2020. It did some things to so many people and in so many different ways. One thing that it did to me psychologically, and we discussed before how, like, I'm sitting up here on the south side of Chicago, like it was going down. One thing it did for me psychologically is it kind of flipped the switch, and I feel like I have a pre and a post life after that moment in time, and the way that I navigate now is that I'm kind of done. I'm done. I don't navigate in spaces with people who I have to, you know, verbally, emotionally, psychologically contort myself for their comfort. You know, I'm a reasonable person. I don't set out in this world to hurt anybody or make anybody uncomfortable, except for if it's just my presence that's doing it. That's fine. Then I will, I will deprive you of my presence. Like, I don't have to be here. So I don't personally encounter a lot of white fragility episodes anymore because I don't navigate those spaces too often, unless I'm opening myself up for, here's a film I made and here, let's talk about it. Like, in my personal life and my professional life, I'm blessed and privileged to be able to, like, be where I am feeling like I'm supposed to be, and I don't have to deal with those kind of politics. But yeah, before 2020, good Lord, the code switch was so real that, you know, I always say, and not as a source of pride by any means, but that I was raised on respectability politics and code switching. That's what I grew up understanding. This is how we change and behave to be accepted and approved of. And you know, it's cringeworthy to me now, but I understand it. I understand there's a lot of people who are still in that. I blessedly am not, though. So yeah,
I know, you know, and when you get to that, it's so good, but it never ceases to amaze me that some people, you know, I mean, it's like I was talking to someone, and the only politics I'm going to go on is like they were talking about how they said how, well, Kamala Harris, so sometimes she talked this way. And I said, you know what? You're black. You can't tell me that you not have had a day when you go in for a job that you talk one way, and how there's another way when you're down here that you're going to talk. There's a way that you talk when you feel threatened. That has been almost like a survival piece for us to have to do this code switching. And sometimes it just wears you out.
Girl.
You know, it just wears you out. Like you said, hey, you know, I was talking to someone who was talking about going someplace, and I said, well, what's the demographics like? It was in Missouri. And I looked and I said, let me look this up. I said, you know, only 3% of the population is black.
Yeah.
I said, I can't go there with you. I said, I can't go there with you. I said, you know, can't walk that way anymore, you know, just can't with you, you know. You know,
yeah, and it's funny how people want to couch that as like you've got an issue because you're not open-minded or you know. But the thing is that it's like, look at the history of this country. 3% of us anywhere has really seldom been a safe space. You know what I'm saying? Like this isn't formed in a vacuum. You know, these aren't like fictitious, you know, phobias that we're creating here. And you know, yeah, girl, I can't.
I know. And it's like, no, I can't do it. So, I mean, so then you go and with Crimson, I mean, you know, which is also to me, it's at a time that it's really important, you know, where we need to be talking about women's health issues, but particularly that you still have Black women who are dying because of, you know, things that other people can get cured and doing. And we still have a fear sometimes of going to the doctor to find out about things, and some things we don't want to talk about. Crimson is, to me, is so important. So important, you know, for not only for us, but for our daughters, our granddaughters, those next generations of Black women, so that we can have healthy births, healthy lives. I mean, was there any particular incident or thing that drew you to that, wanting to put that up on the screen, to have that conversation, to open that door for people to have those conversations about our health as Black women?
Yeah, I've also been doing some community work for a few years now with IMSADA. Center for Community Transformation. IMSADA is a Kiswahili word that means aid or help. And one of the things that we've been focusing, it was started by a group of Black doulas. One of them, our late sister Amina, and this was like her dream. And so we kind of keeping the torch going. And so women's health issues, and especially maternity issues, is one of the first things that we've kind of started tackling. And we were doing events for the community, Black Women's Health Summits, these and that. So that was something that was really on my mind a lot. And I read a book that changed my life. It's called Medical Apartheid by Harriet A. Washington. And it highlights in devastating detail, I mean, it's over 500 pages, just the history of Black people's health in this country from chattel enslavement to now. And the ways that it has been just, I mean, it's abysmal. And a lot of the things that, like you said, a lot of people don't want to go to the doctor. There are like reasons for that, like real solid reasons. There's a history of Black folks going to the doctor and coming back with like parts missing, you know, like a Mississippi appendectomy. That wasn't an appendectomy. That was like sterilization that these people were getting without consent. And anyway, long story short, because I've been working with this group and because the focus was in particular Black women's health, because of the literature I was exposing myself to, again, books, they're a wonderful thing, y'all. And the things I was learning, and again, you know, that goes right along with me and my mission in life to learn more and spread more understanding about the Black experience, right? Because of all that, Crimson was just an offshoot and one way for me doing my part, right? So yeah, I was doing a lot of with this group, I was doing, you know, community lectures, letting people know about Black women's health, reproductive health throughout history, how the father of gynecology was practicing on enslaved women without anesthesia, you know, like the dark history of it and all. So, yeah, Crimson kind of fits up in there. But also, I mean, it's very contemporary. You know that there are just a slew of lawsuits now for all these hair care companies with these relaxers, you know, because of the links to Black women, in particular, Black women's reproductive organs. These chemicals that these mamas, you know, not knowing, but, you know, they are putting these chemicals on their precious daughters' hair at young ages, and it's impacting their fertility years down the line. And, you know, that, girl, that is also, that's the house that racism created, a place where people are, you know, they are inadvertently damaging potentially generations because they're trying to have their child feel beautiful in this white beauty standard, because they're trying to have their child be accepted where straight hair is professional. Like that's all happening in the house that racism built. So yeah, it's a lot, Michelle.
But, I mean, you know, it really is. Like in Detroit just recently, they opened in the heart of the city a birth center. And part of it is, it's like recognizing that so many women weren't getting help. And you're seeing people, you know, people like, well, I know people, what's that do? I wouldn't do that, you know. But it's like that whole holistic thing of getting back to where we're looking after these young mothers, their kids. You know, it's midwife, it's safe, but a lot of it came from, you know, sometimes they couldn't afford to go to the hospital. But here's a safe space for, and that's what the focus is on. And, you know, I mean, it's like you said, you read those things. I can recall about what has happened to us. You know, I remember my grandmother and her sister, when they would get dressed, they would always put talcum powder in their all. I mean, you know, and
yes.
You know, and I had an aunt who grew up in the South, and later in life we went, and the doctor said, "You had surgery," and she said, "Well, I don't know. I don't remember. It was something that had happened as a child." She said she remembered going in. She didn't know what they had done. You know, we have been those victims. I mean, we've been victims, and I'm going to look for that book, Medical Apartheid, because it's so real. I can recall being on a plane reading about Henrietta Lack and wanting to read it, but at the same time just wanting to hit somebody, you know. Just wanting to hit somebody at the same time. I'd read it, want to hit somebody, you know, and be mad, you know, because how we were guinea pigs. And I know that still impacts some Black women now. When you talk about, well, you know, have you gone in? Oh, I'm not going to go on in and see about this, or, you know, they haven't had any kind of medical care. and then sometimes by the time they finally do, it's too late. But because of fear of what might happen, I don't know what they're doing to me. So I know I was in Atlanta once, and there was this whole thing, and they were trying to talk about women's health, and there were many women who had these fears, who had things that they knew might not be right with them, but they didn't trust going to a doctor. And the number of Black doctors who are trained, I talked to one woman who has lupus, and she said the number of doctors, because now she goes and advocates for it, the number of doctors who are trained about lupus, particularly in communities of color, is so slim that many people who come through Lupus Detroit have been misdiagnosed so many times till they find a doctor.
That's such a sad and common story, Michelle. It's really hard to hear. But, yeah, if you read Medical Apartheid, you're not going to be feeling too social. So let me just give you that trigger warning. It's not going to make you want to go and just, be in the company of folks and,
I'll be calling you, girl, and you'll go girl.
I already know. Yeah, you will be angry. You will be very angry, disgusted, a whole bunch of things. But it's real, And, that kind of just goes with it. We're Black in this country. We've been Black for some time. We know a lot of our history. It ain't pretty, right? So we're used to it in that sense. Yeah. Yep.
Wow. You are just, I'm just amazed at that. It's like things that I learned from just talking to you, and the ways that you just sort of make me think about things. But I want to circle back to this anthology. Okay, so I remember you talking about, because I know, but you are art, and you were talking about using some of your art being a cover. And I know that art, there's parts of art that are, besides the words in these 3 books, there's a symbolism to them. Like Eddie was saying how the covers, how he wanted one to be red, one to be black, one to be green. So even if you hadn't read them, if you were at somebody's house and you saw them on the shelf, there's a symbolism that did that. I know you contributed art to that. Besides the words, can you talk about your art and how you determined which piece of art was going to be part of this project?
Absolutely. So one of the things that I love working with Rainbow Room Publishing, like I said, is it's relational. It's not just transactional, right? So I wasn't having to go through my portfolio and pitch. Eddie is my friend. That's my brother. And so we know each other, and I share my work just to share my work. And so I was showing him at one point some of my pieces from a series that I've been working on, frankly, way too long. I need to land this plane. I'm ready to have a show. But it's a series I've been working on called Witness, and it features, it's paintings and collages, and they are eyes. The main subject is an eye, and inside the iris is some expression of Black life, and it's diverse. It could just be from a Black man's face, just the beauty of a Black man, to a scene from I'll Do Voyage, which is the image on the second book, which is a slaver ship with enslaved Africans in the belly of it. So it can be, on the spectrum of Black life. If Black folks did it or are doing it, then I'll put it in there. So I was just showing him some of my work, and then he was like, sis, from a Black perspective, this is an eye. How do we perceive? Where does our perspective come from? A lot of times from our sight. So it just kind of dovetailed in that way. And so I happened to have enough that he liked to complete the series. So the first one is red, and the book cover itself is the red, black, and green for the Pan-African flag. And then my artwork, he's just positioned it there. So the first one is called Abolition, and in the center of that iris is just the numbers, 1865, and so that's called Abolition. The second one is called Voyage, and so that's a collage multimedia piece where it's a ship and draped against this beautiful collage of blue skies, and obviously something very ugly is happening on that vessel. And then the last one is called They Hid It in a Book, and it's tongue in cheek. It's that old horrible joke about, if you want to hide something from a black person, where do you put it? You put it in a book. Well, haha, joke's on you. But so in the center of that eye is a stack of books and an apple on top, an apple for, your teacher, so learning. But the books, they are all representative of colors. So they're from a canon of, black literary giants. We have Toni Morrison, Toni with the Bluest Eye. We have the W.E.B. Du Bois, Souls of Black Folk. We have Lincoln's White Dream, Leroy Bennett Jr. So that's what that one is. And additionally, he used a photograph called Windy City Rose. That's for the last one. So it's my artwork and then a photograph that is the foliage, the green leaves of the rose make the green of the book. So yeah, that's how that came about. My artwork on the covers was a plus because obviously my first thing was like, oh, you're publishing these books. Well, here's what I have. And again, relational. Eddie is one of my people that I can call and be like, okay, I'm working on this piece. You got 15 minutes? Okay, let me read this to you. What you think? He just happens to, every time I read something, he's like, sis, I want it. I'm like, okay, let me finish it. You can have it. Yeah, so let's see. The first one I have Transitions. Second one I have Shatter. And then the third one is Whoa, Woo Woo, which it's fun. And that, my last work is always my favorite work. So Whoa, Woo Woo has been my favorite for a minute. Yeah, that's how that happened.
Oh, really? Because, yeah, I like that it's like more than, this, to read each one is important. It's going to be fulfilling. It's going to take you on a trip. But then the outside, like you said, who would say, okay, inside the iris, each one is a different thing, which also makes you think, it makes you think, I love the how you were talking about how the ones with the books, and people have often said that. And again, like I talked to this friend of mine who teaches, and we had talked about that, and he said, how people didn't know how, even when you go back to the Bible, they wanted us to read the ones that said about being that yes, we should be happy slaves. But then when we learned to read that, we found the pages that talked about liberation. And they didn't know what they were doing. They didn't know they gave us a book and reread, and we found there's more than just what you want to. And I think that you still hear that, oh, don't nobody want to read. I love books, and like I said, I love books. I love reading. The best thing that you can give me as a gift is a book, and because there are things that you can read and you can learn and to do. And when you read, and that's one of the things that I like about Eddie too, like if you're thinking on something and you say, like you said, I'm thinking about this, and this is what I've done, and he'll encourage you one way or the other. He'll tell you what he's looking for. He'll help you, or he'll say, you need to do that. When he and I were talking, I said, I've got all these bits and pieces, and I need to sit down and do it. He said, yeah, you need to sit down and do it. He said, then send it to me. And I said, yeah, you're right. I need to sit down and do it. And how important that is, that connection. The fact that he's found, and it's not a whole, I also like that in these books, it's not a whole bunch of people. Some people are in every book. So it's like you get a sense of knowing them. You hear them. Somebody might be your voice. going like, wow, yeah, that's what I'm thinking, you know. So I think that is just like, it's just like amazing. You know, girl, you are something else. So, I mean, you really are. So I know that you said that you have more trips planned. I went to Colombia.
Did you? Did you love it?
I did. I did love it. And you know, okay, I'm one of those people who look for the people, and pretty soon I find my ways to people. And I went there with some people, some friends, ended up meeting somebody who was there, who ended up inviting me to their family home for Sunday dinner. And
love it.
I mean, you know, it was like, and my Spanish is, you know, not the best, and like here it was a family dinner. I mean, generations, and like one of them, it was like having an auntie helping me learn, you know, and they weren't rich. And somebody said, "Oh, weren't you afraid to eat that food?" I said, "You know what? These people welcomed me into their home and shared with me their meal." You know, yeah, I felt very welcomed. I felt very welcomed. You know, it was just something beautiful about it. Where about in Colombia did you go?
Yeah, we went to Cali, Colombia, and because when I did my kind of preliminary research, I found that there was a large population of Black folks there. And so we just kind of went there, and part of the time we were kind of self-exploring. Another part we hired the services of Live Be Do, which is a Black-owned travel company run by a brother named Akeem, and he had a guide take us around and give us some of the history for part of the time, and it was a really great experience. I loved the weather, and what I had forgotten is that, you know, when you go to Central South America, like your dollar is long, right? You go to Europe, it's gonna be kind of short. But I went there and I was like, oh yeah, I forgot about this aspect. I could get used to this. So that was pretty cool. We stayed in a nice Airbnb that, like, if you'd have got it for that money here, it would have been a dive. But there, it was, like, lush. So really enjoyed ourselves. The food was great. The weather was great. We had a great time with the people. What I always love going in spaces that are not my country, but where the diaspora is represented, is to just, like, walk around and shut my mouth and see who approaches me. And, you know, if they come approaching me in the language that they speak there, I'm like, yep, you know, I could just be like anybody else. So it was really cool. A lot of sad stories, meaning that the country, it's got a history, and that, you know, even our guide, I was asking about the political climate and, like, what's going on here, and, you know, how are the political issues, and what does racism look like here? And a lot of people had in their history stories about displacement, the drug thing there. It was real. And, you know, different factions, narcos, guerrillas, politicians that, you know, are not, like, advocating for the people per se. But in spite of that, it's a culture that really knows how to, like, capture its joy. It's a party culture. Oh my God! Michelle, I'm so embarrassed. I didn't even know this was possible. I sprained my hip from salsa dancing. That's how much of it I was doing. I came home with this crazy limp. I'm like, what is happening here? And I went to the doctor, and she touched it. I'm like, oh, stop that. She's like, yeah, that's swollen. I think you sprained it. And that's the craziest thing ever I've ever heard. But, girl, salsa till the break of dawn, like everywhere. People will just break out and dance. I loved it. It was amazing. I definitely want to go back soon. It was amazing.
I know. I can recall because I was in Medellin, and I went in a restaurant, and there was this mural. Okay. And the guy said, I bet you don't know who that woman is. I said, that's Celia Cruz. He said,
there you go.
You know Celia Cruz? And I was talking about how one time I had seen her when she had performed up here. And I mean, and hey, it was on then. It was like, hey, party time.
Absolutely.
But one of the things that I also find that I think what I was telling people, it is nice, and I've gone to other places in the Caribbean to see brown people, to see brown people, just to be there, be amongst brown people, and to talk to them, and to not talk, and to sometimes dispel, crazy things that they believe because they see it on TV or whatever, but just to get to know them, and particularly ones who recognize that their brown is our brown, and make that connection, and make that connection. Yeah. So, well, when you're ready to go back and hit them party buses, give your sis a call. I am ready.
Girl, you ain't said nothing but a word.
That's time, and I know people who are like, well, I don't know if I go down there. I said, you go down there with some sense. You go down there with some sense. You know what's going on, and you make real connections with real people. Now, I also see that you're hoping to go to Cuba.
Yeah, that's so I only have two mandates for my birthday, is to not be in this country when it happens, and to be someplace with people that, and just be enjoying myself. And so that's my next birthday trip. So I'll be going to Cuba in March, and it'll be work and pleasure. Of course it's pleasure because travel, that's what I love to do, but again, I will be there getting information that I can then bring back and use however I use it, either with my artwork, my storytelling, like all sorts of things. I'm actually working on a novel right now, and God, it's the joy of my life. But the main character is on a healing journey, and part of that is going to include travel. So I legitimately do have some spaces that I need to find myself in the next few months so I can do some research for this novel. So Cuba will kind of culminate that, because that'll be in March, and I would like to be wrapping up around that time. So, yeah.
That sounds great. I know how it is, because, I have a novel in I've started parts of it, but that's some part. At one point, going and traveling and sort of like feeling in that space, really, it really helps you creatively, and then to bring it back. So you've got all of these things, and you're bringing them back. What if you said that one part is like the core, but all of these sort of like intersect into your secret passion? What would that intersection look like? What's that space?
I think the intersection is the intersection of like Joy Avenue with Identity Boulevard. If I had to, and I say identity because it's funny, this whole quote unquote race thing is a complete contrivance. It's a social construction. It was made up and put on us, but it is a lived experience as a result. And it is a sense of community, a sense of overcoming and triumph and pride even, and expression. And so I identify heavily as a Black woman. And so when I go out in the world, I am perceiving through that lens, and I am looking for affirmation of that identity. But I'm also an artist, and I'm many other things. And so when I say, Joy Street or Avenue and Identity Boulevard, it's like I go out in this world, and I just really feel that to be authentically who I am, in all that encompasses, that is a source. I have to do that with a sense of, I don't know, Michelle, you love the life you have, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so joy has to be a part of that, or what am I doing? If I'm not doing it in joy, then I'm not being who I really am meant to be. Mm-hmm. So that's why I would feel it's the intersection of those two things. It's identity and joy in all of these endeavors, some kind of way. Yeah.
Okay. So the world, as I said, the world is your oyster. The world, traveling, all of this comes into, it's a big part of you. You see certain things everywhere you go. I know that you do. Like you just talked about how it comes in and reflects in your art and reflects in your identity. But Chicago for you is still home.
Absolutely.
Okay, what is it? If you've gone all those and you hit Chicago, what's that feeling?
That's a loaded question, actually. So my love affair with Chicago is really, really deep. I mean, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, deep. I am a transplant, as you know. I was not born and raised here. I'm from Southern California. However, Chicago is a heritage home. So my mother was born here. Her mother was a Mississippi migrant as a baby, but my father was born here. His mother was born here. Their people were born here. So I'm Chicago by way of the Great Migration, and then I'm Chicago by way of much earlier, and then I'm Chicago by choice, by way of when I came of age and I was a late teenager. I decided this is where I wanted to be. It was a character in my house growing up, Chicago, because this is where my family was from. And I heard stories and I heard about the places, and I felt like I knew it. So I had to come see for myself, right? And so now I've been here a whole generation. This is definitely home. When I go out into the greater world, I feel like I go out representing Chicago. Definitely when I say I'm from Chicago, I get some interesting feedback from people in far-flung places that kind of blows me like, whoa, what have you been listening to? Because Chicago gets a really bad rep in the press. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's real talk. So I've heard some crazy things about like, oh, you from Chicago? Oh, my goodness. And it's like, dude, that's what I'm hearing about the Middle East. What are you talking about? Mm-hmm. So it's like, I'm out here with you and you talking about where I'm from. But, yeah, when I come back to Chicago, I feel a sense that it's a grounding, right? I feel rooted. One interesting thing that I began feeling kind of a decade ago, and I noticed it, and I was like, oh, I don't like this feeling. But as soon as I would hit the airspace from, the domestic airspace, sometimes I would feel like a download of, I don't know how I want to say it. It's almost like tension, and let me explain that. Tension for like the vigilance I have to use as a person who lives here. Mm-hmm. So I don't like that we get this horrible reputation in the press for all of these, disastrous things. I don't love that. Because it doesn't tell the whole story, that like life and joy happens here and some really beautiful things happen here. But it is part of the story. And, there are things that there are just ways to move about. There are just ways to move about to keep yourself safe when you're in any big city, right? Mm-hmm. And so I feel that sometimes when I am hitting our airspace, like, oh yeah, okay, I got to think about that again. And, it's interesting. Like, I've literally not been anywhere in the world. I'm talking about Africa, the Middle East, the Caribbean, Mexico City. Like, I've never been anywhere else in the world where I have been, I just haven't been fearful. I'm like, I'm from Chicago. Y'all ain't fading me, right? So that I hope I answered your question, but those are some of the feelings that I have. I have a lot of feelings. I like, I'm home. This is wonderful. So now I get to plan my next trip. But some of that is like a tension that I just navigate through, because it's real. I mean, I would be lying if I said that I don't sometimes hear gunshots outside in the street. It's not every day. It's not even every month where I live, but it happens, That's not how I grew up, so I mark that. But I don't know, Michelle. Like I said, my love affair with Chicago is deep. I live here on purpose. I have studied here from pleasure and delight. I take it with me wherever I go. So yeah.
That's funny because you ever say like sometimes like I'm from Chicago, and sometimes you have to explain, but other times you go, look, I'm from Chicago. Oh, never mind.
Right. Yeah.
I know. I think like whenever you have a connection with a city, because I know like I'm from Detroit, and I'm from the East Side, and there are places that I was in Atlanta, and someone and I said, Detroit East Side, and we're like, whoa, and it's like, it's like, yeah, it's a blessing and a curse.
Right. It's a robust lived experience. Let's say that.
Yeah. Yep. So okay, so it sounds like you're at a good place in your life. Everything might not be perfect and you still have things to do, but it sounds like that you have reached a good place in your life where, as you look at, the next chapter moving forward, how are you feeling?
I am feeling very comfortable with my journey of becoming. I'm not a little girl anymore. I'm a grown person. And I understand the roller coaster at this point. I understand that if it's going up, that's great, and I love it, and I feel it fully, knowing that it's gonna go down again. And when it does go down, that's fine, because I also understand, hard times ain't forever. It's gonna go back up. So I sometimes say that I am embracing my junior elder status. So some of the ways is like, giving no F's about certain things. Like, look, I'm going to kind of say what I want to say on this one because why not, I'm not mad at all, Michelle, as they say. I ain't mad at nothing. So, yeah, I'm enjoying myself. I am.
Well, it's been wonderful catching up with you.
I want to thank my guest, an independent artist who wears several hats, Ms. Senyah Haynes. Senyah first introduced us to her series of children's books, Jayla Jaunts, which follow the adventures of little Jayla and her magical Aunt YaYa as they travel around the country. Currently, there are 5 books available featuring trips to Alabama, Alaska, Arkansas, Arizona, and California, with Colorado soon to be released. Her 2 short films, White Female and Crimson, have both been shown at film festivals and been winning awards. Her film, White Female, was born from the unrest following the murder of George Floyd. The film Crimson illuminates the issue of Black women's reproductive health. Senyah is also a contributor in Rainbow Room's publishing anthology, From a Black Perspective. Earlier volumes have included her artwork on the cover and short stories by the author. We'll be back soon with more interviews of individuals living between the lines, standing boldly in the crosshairs of their intersectionality and creating change. You can support Collections by Michelle Brown Blog Radio by following us on Facebook and Instagram, or becoming a monthly supporter on Patreon. Current and past episodes of the show can be heard on SoundCloud. Stay tuned as we continue to introduce you to more amazing individuals right here on Collections by Michelle Brown. Thank you for listening.
Rainbow Room Publishing invites you to Homecoming, the virtual reading and Q&A event for From a Black Perspective, the Homeland. Sunday, February 23rd from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m.